The work you do behind the scenes is largely unseen, yet it is absolutely critical.
Princess Anne opened Princess Diana's jewellery box and went pale. What she found inside wasn't just jewels, it was a message from beyond the grave that would shake the monarchy to its core.
I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Hidden behind fake panels were letters, secret photographs, and a key marked Zurich. Diana's handwriting was unmistakable. If you're reading this, they silenced me. But who are they? And why did someone try to break into Prince George's school the moment Anne started digging?
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
Behind a sealed wooden panel in a quieter wing of the palace, workers discovered a small room that appeared to have been closed off since the late 1990s. The space was modest, showing no signs of recent entry, and contained personal belongings that had been left undisturbed for nearly 3 decades. When palace officials were notified of the discovery, they quickly recognized the historical importance of what had been found. This was a room connected to Princess Diana, sealed away in the aftermath of her death in 1997. The decision was made to bring in Princess Anne to oversee the cataloguing process. As one of the most senior working members of the royal family, known for her discretion and steady approach to duty, she was considered the natural choice for such a delicate task. Anne had built a reputation over decades as someone who kept away from unnecessary drama and handled sensitive matters with professionalism. Her relationship with Diana had been complicated, evolving over the years from initial distance to a quiet, if unspoken, respect. When Anne entered the room for the first time, she found herself surrounded by remnants of a life that had captivated millions. Evening gowns hung carefully preserved, boxes contained handwritten correspondence, and photographs captured moments both public and private. The atmosphere was heavy with memory, each item representing a fragment of Diana's complex existence within the royal institution. Among the thousands of items in the room, one object caught Anne's attention in a way the others did not. Tucked away on a shelf and partially concealed beneath a silk scarf sat a jewellery box that seemed different from everything else around it. The craftsmanship was immediately striking. Made from dark rosewood and decorated with delicate inlays of pearls and sapphires, it had an elegance that set it apart. Even under layers of dust accumulated over years of neglect, the piece maintained a certain presence. Anne picked up the box carefully, noting its unexpected weight. As she turned it in her hands, examining the intricate details of its construction, something caught her eye. Along the base of the lid, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was an engraved inscription. The words were simple but deliberately placed. For those who dare seek truth, DS. The initials were unmistakable. Diana Spencer. Not her royal title, just her own name, the one she was born with. The choice felt intentional, personal in a way that suggested this object held meaning beyond its obvious beauty. Anne found herself looking around the room again, this time with a different perspective. Had Diana intentionally left something behind, knowing it might one day be discovered? According to palace records and accounts from staff who worked at Kensington Palace during that period, Diana had been known to keep certain items separate from the official royal collections. Friends and former employees have mentioned over the years that she valued privacy and had expressed concerns about documentation and security in the months leading up to her death. While many dismissed these concerns at the time, the discovery of this hidden room has prompted historians to reconsider what they thought they knew about Diana's final year. Anne opened the jewellery box with steady hands. Inside, she found an impressive collection of pieces. There were earrings set with rare Burmese rubies, a sapphire bracelet of exceptional quality, and an emerald and diamond pendant that would have been valuable by any standard. Each piece was beautiful, the kind of jewellery one would expect to find in a royal collection. But as Anne examined them more closely, she noticed something unusual. On the back of each item were tiny markings. Some appeared to be symbols, others looked like dates or reference numbers. None of them matched any inventory system Anne was familiar with from her decades within the royal household. She retrieved a magnifying glass to get a better look. Under magnification, the markings became clearer but no less mysterious. Some resembled geographical coordinates. Others looked like they might be case numbers or possibly banking codes. One brooch bore a sequence that had the structure of an international bank identifier. These were not the kind of sentimental inscriptions you would expect on personal jewelry. They seemed methodical, purposeful, as if each piece carried information meant to be decoded by someone who knew what they were looking for. Anne set the pieces aside and turned her attention back to the box itself. Her fingers moved across the interior surfaces, feeling for anything unusual in the construction. The craftsmanship was sophisticated enough that hidden mechanisms would not be immediately obvious. After several minutes of careful examination, her thumb pressed against a slightly raised section near the base. There was a soft mechanical click, barely audible, and she felt the bottom panel shift ever so slightly beneath her touch. Anne paused, processing what had just happened. She carefully slid the panel to reveal a second, hidden compartment built into the base of the box. The space was shallow, but efficiently used. Inside lay several items that clearly had not been meant for casual discovery. There was a bundle of letters, handwritten on personal stationery and tied together with a pale blue ribbon. The paper had aged but remained legible, and there was a faint scent of lavender, the kind that comes from sachets used to preserve documents. Beneath the letters were several photographs, glossy prints that showed Diana in various locations that did not appear to be from official royal events. In some images, she seemed to be deliberately dressed down, meeting with people Anne did not recognize. The settings were informal, cafes and private spaces rather than the grand venues typically associated with royal appearances. At the bottom of the compartment was a small silver key attached to a tag. The tag bore handwritten text that read, "Zurich, Deposit Box 837L. Anne stared at it, trying to make sense of what she was looking at. A safety deposit box in Switzerland, the key hidden away in a secret compartment alongside unmarked photographs and private letters. This was not the kind of thing you did casually. She returned to the letters, noticing that the top envelope had her name written on it in Diana's distinctive handwriting. The message was direct. To Anne, please read if I am gone. The date, written in the corner, made Anne's breath catch. It had been penned just 3 days before Diana's death in Paris in August 1997. Anne sat down slowly, the weight of what she was holding suddenly very real. She carefully opened the first letter and began to read. The handwriting showed signs of urgency in places, with words occasionally smudged as though written quickly. The opening line was stark and unsettling. Anne, if you're reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me. The room seemed to close in around her for a moment. This was not a melodramatic farewell or an emotional outpouring. The tone was measured, deliberate, and deeply serious. Diana had written this as someone who believed her life was in danger, someone who wanted to ensure that certain information would survive, even if she did not. Anne closed her eyes briefly and took a steady breath. Whatever Diana had uncovered, or believed she had uncovered, it was now in Anne's possession. And based on the elaborate precautions taken to hide this evidence, someone had clearly wanted it to remain buried. Anne held the letter carefully, her eyes moving across Diana's handwriting. The urgency was evident in the way the words flowed across the page, letters slanting forward as if written against a deadline. After the chilling opening line, Diana's tone shifted between personal reflection and detailed documentation of events that had troubled her deeply in her final years. Diana began by recounting an incident from 1995 during a charity gala for a children's foundation she had been actively supporting. The organization had a strong reputation, and Diana had invested significant time and energy into promoting its work. However, she had begun noticing inconsistencies in how funds were being distributed. Money that was supposed to reach overseas programs seemed to be delayed or diverted. When she quietly asked questions, seeking straightforward answers about the financial flow, she was met with vague explanations and what she described as deliberate evasion. According to Diana's account in the letter, her initial concerns were dismissed by those around her as simply not understanding how large charitable organizations operated. But Diana had not been satisfied with those explanations. She had continued to ask questions, and the more she pressed, the more resistance she encountered. In her letter, she described receiving subtle warnings from people she had considered allies, suggestions that she was overstepping her role and that financial matters were not her concern. Anne turned to the next page and found something that surprised her even more. Diana had created her own spreadsheet. carefully hand-copied with columns of numbers, dates, and account references. The level of detail was remarkable. Diana had tracked specific transfers, noting when money left designated charity accounts and where it appeared to go next. Some transactions led to accounts that Diana had managed to identify as belonging to private individuals, including businessmen with no apparent connection to charitable work. What made the documentation even more disturbing was Diana's notation that some of these accounts had ties to individuals within the extended royal network. These were not minor figures, but people with significant influence and access to resources. Diana had marked certain entries with question marks and notes indicating she was still trying to verify connections, but the pattern she was uncovering suggested systematic diversion of charitable funds. Historical context supports the plausibility of Diana's concerns. During the 1990s, several major international charities faced scandals involving financial mismanagement and fund diversion. Investigative journalists during that period exposed multiple cases where money intended for humanitarian causes was redirected to private interests or used for purposes far removed from the stated charitable missions. Diana's humanitarian work, particularly her involvement with landmine awareness and children's welfare organizations, would have given her insight into how these systems operated and where vulnerabilities might exist. Diana's letter continued with descriptions of meetings she had begun conducting in secret. She mentioned connecting with investigative journalists, including one based in France and another in Switzerland, who were already working on stories about international financial corruption. These journalists had apparently been tracking similar patterns and were interested in what Diana had discovered. According to her account, they helped her understand the scope of what she was looking at, explaining that charitable organizations were sometimes used as fronts for moving money across borders in ways that avoided scrutiny. The letter described a level of operational security that seemed almost theatrical, yet Diana wrote about it matter-of-factly. She mentioned using code names when communicating with her sources, arranging meetings at unexpected locations, and becoming increasingly aware that her movements were being monitored. She had started to notice the same vehicles appearing near her residence at different times. Phone conversations seemed to have odd background sounds. Mail arrived, opened and resealed, though nothing was ever reported missing. Diana wrote that she had begun documenting her conversations, using a small recording device to capture meetings and phone calls. She stored these recordings in multiple locations, never keeping everything in one place. Former staff members who worked at Kensington Palace during this period have mentioned in various interviews over the years that Diana had become more private about certain activities in her final months, often making arrangements without going through traditional palace channels. At the time, this was attributed to her desire for independence following her divorce, but Diana's letter suggested there were other reasons for her caution. The most concerning element of Diana's investigation involved whistleblowers who had approached her directly. According to her letter, several people with inside knowledge of financial irregularities had sought her out, believing that her public profile might offer them some protection. These individuals provided her with documents and testimony, but they were terrified. Diana wrote that one of them had told her explicitly that people who exposed these kinds of operations often faced serious consequences. The whistleblower had urged her to be extremely careful about what she did with the information. As Anne read through these sections, she found herself re-evaluating everything she thought she had known about Diana's final year. The public narrative had focused on Diana's personal life, her relationship struggles, and her evolving role outside the formal structure of the royal family. Media coverage from 1996 and 1997 had portrayed her as someone searching for purpose and dealing with the emotional aftermath of her divorce, but this letter revealed a parallel narrative that had been completely hidden from view. Diana had been conducting what amounted to a private investigation, one that had apparently led her to believe she was uncovering serious criminal activity. Whether her conclusions were entirely accurate or partially influenced by the stress she was under remains a matter that historians and investigators would need to examine carefully. But what was undeniable from the letter was that Diana herself believed she had found something significant, and she believed she was in danger because of it. The tone of the letter shifted when Diana wrote about her sons. Her handwriting became slightly less controlled here, as if emotion was breaking through the careful documentation. She wrote that she was not afraid of what might happen to her personally, but she was deeply afraid for William and Harry. She worried about what kind of world they would inherit, what kind of institution they would be expected to serve. She wrote that if the corruption she was investigating extended into the structures that would one day rely on her sons, then they needed to know the truth, even if that truth was difficult. Anne found herself unexpectedly moved by these passages. Her own relationship with Diana had been complicated by differences in personality and approach. Anne had built her life around duty, discipline, and staying out of the spotlight, except when required. Diana's more emotional, public approach to royal life had sometimes seemed excessive to Anne, but reading these words, Anne recognized something she had perhaps missed before. Diana's actions in her final months had not been driven by attention-seeking or instability. They had been driven by a mother's fierce desire to protect her children from inheriting a corrupt system. The final page of the letter contained a statement that brought everything into sharp focus. Diana wrote that she had taken steps to preserve everything she had discovered. She explained that she could not keep all the evidence with her because it was too dangerous. Instead, she had created what she called an insurance policy, securing the most important documents and recordings in a location outside of Britain, somewhere she believed they would be safe even if something happened to her. Anne looked again at the small silver key from the hidden compartment. The tag reading Zurich, Deposit Box 837L suddenly carried enormous weight. Diana had not been speaking metaphorically. She had literally deposited her evidence in a Swiss bank vault, one of the most secure storage systems in the world. Switzerland's banking privacy laws were famously strict, and safety deposit boxes there were protected by multiple layers of security and confidentiality. The implications were staggering. If Diana's letter was accurate, there was a collection of documents, recordings, and testimony sitting in a vault in Zurich, untouched for nearly 30 years. Evidence that Diana had believed was important enough to hide internationally. Evidence that she thought might explain why she felt her life was in danger. Anne sat in silence for several minutes, processing what she had read. The responsible thing would be to turn everything over to proper authorities, to let official channels investigate Diana's claims. But Diana's letter had made it clear she had not trusted official channels. She had believed that some of the people involved in what she was investigating had connections to those very institutions. The key sat on the table before Anne, small and ordinary looking, yet representing a decision point. She could choose to leave the past buried, to treat Diana's concerns as the products of stress and paranoia during a difficult time in her life, or she could follow where the evidence led, even if that path took her into uncomfortable territory. Anne picked up the key and held it in her palm. Whatever was waiting in that Swiss vault had been deemed important enough by Diana to risk everything to preserve. After nearly 3 decades, perhaps it was time for someone to finally look at what Diana had been trying to say. The decision to travel to Zurich was not one Anne made lightly. She understood that accessing whatever Diana had stored in that vault would set events in motion that could not be easily reversed. She arranged the trip quietly, using personal resources rather than official royal channels. Her security detail was told only that she had private business to attend to, and the itinerary provided to palace staff deliberately obscured her actual destination. The flight departed early in the morning, landing in Switzerland before most people had started their day. Zurich was known for its discretion, a city that had built centuries of reputation on the principle that some matters were best handled away from public view. The bank Diana had chosen was one of the oldest institutions in the city, the kind of establishment that valued client privacy above almost everything else. Anne presented the key and the reference number to the bank clerk. Her identification was checked with professional efficiency, and she was led through a series of security checkpoints, each more isolated than the last. The process was designed to ensure complete confidentiality. No conversation occurred beyond what was strictly necessary. Finally, she was shown into a private viewing room where the safety deposit box was placed before her. The box itself was larger than Anne had expected. When she opened it, she found it meticulously organized. There were multiple folders, each one labeled in Diana's handwriting with dates and subject categories. Financial records filled much of the space, including ledgers that appeared to be photocopies of official documents, bank transfer receipts, and what looked like internal memos from various charitable organizations. Everything was color-coded and cross-referenced in a way that suggested Diana had spent considerable time organizing the material. Photographs were arranged in separate envelopes, each one labeled with locations and dates. Some showed Diana meeting with people in casual settings. Others appeared to be surveillance-style images of individuals Diana had been monitoring. There were also official-looking documents, contracts and agreements that Diana had apparently obtained through her network of contacts. But what drew Anne's attention most were the storage media at the bottom of the box. There were several cassette tapes and compact discs, each one carefully labelled with a date and brief description. One disc simply bore the words, "If I disappear." Anne asked the bank staff if there was equipment available to view the contents, and she was provided with a laptop and appropriate players. She inserted the first disc with hands that were steadier than she felt. The screen flickered for a moment, then Diana appeared. She was seated in what looked like a private apartment, somewhere plain and unremarkable. There was no makeup, no careful styling. This was not the Princess of Wales as the world knew her. This was Diana speaking as herself, without performance or pretense. Her voice was clear and calm as she began. She explained that if someone was watching this recording, it meant her precautions had not been enough. She wanted whoever found this material to understand what she had discovered and why she believed it was important enough to document so carefully. Diana proceeded to name individuals, not just vague references, but specific people with full names and positions. Some were businessmen involved in international trade. Others were members of aristocratic families with long-standing connections to the royal household. She described how certain charitable organizations, ones with impressive public reputations, were being used as vehicles for moving money in ways that avoided normal oversight and taxation. According to Diana's account, the system worked through layers of legitimate appearing transactions. Money would be donated to a charity with publicly stated goals, humanitarian work, or medical research. But once inside the organization's financial structure, portions of those funds would be redirected through a series of transfers, eventually ending up in private accounts or being used for purposes completely unrelated to the charity's mission. Diana claimed that some of this money was funding arms deals, flowing into offshore investment schemes, or simply enriching individuals who had no legitimate claim to charitable donations. Historical records from the 1990s show that international financial regulation was less coordinated than it became after subsequent reforms. Charitable organizations operated across borders with varying levels of oversight, and mechanisms for tracking international money transfers were less sophisticated than modern systems. Several major scandals during that period exposed similar schemes, lending plausibility to Diana's claims even if the specific allegations she made would require independent verification. Diana spoke about her attempts to report what she had found. She said she had approached certain officials, people she thought she could trust within government regulatory bodies. Some had listened politely and promised to look into her concerns, then nothing happened. Others had been more direct, telling her that she was stepping into areas beyond her understanding and that she should focus on her public charitable work rather than financial investigations. The video showed Diana becoming emotional when she discussed the personal cost of her investigation. She talked about noticing changes in how she was treated by palace staff, feeling increasing isolation from people who had previously been friendly. She described incidents that had frightened her, finding that her car had mechanical problems that seemed suspicious, feeling certain that her phone conversations were being monitored, realizing that she was being followed during private outings. She spoke about her sons with visible pain in her expression. She said she wanted to leave them more than just memories and public goodwill. She wanted them to inherit truth, to understand the realities of the systems they would someday be part of. She believed that if corruption was embedded in institutions that bore their family name, they deserved to know so they could make informed choices about their own futures. Anne sat motionless as the recording ended. The quiet of the viewing room felt oppressive. She went through more of the materials, finding additional recordings that provided further detail, documents that appeared to support Diana's claims, and correspondence that showed Diana had indeed been in contact with investigative journalists in the months before her death. As Anne prepared to leave, the bank clerk who had assisted her made a comment that stopped her cold. Heste mentioned, almost casually, that she was not the first person to inquire about this particular box. Someone else had come approximately 2 weeks earlier, claiming to be a family member seeking to settle estate matters. The inquiry had been denied because proper authorization could not be verified, but the attempt had been noted in the bank's records. The information sent a chill through Anne. Someone else knew about the vault, or at least suspected its existence. Diana's insurance policy was not as secure as she might have hoped. If others were searching for this material, it meant the network Diana had been investigating might still be active. still protective of its secrets. Anne returned to London carrying copies of everything from the vault. The original materials remained in Switzerland, secured with enhanced protection measures. But even taking these precautions, she began noticing changes almost immediately upon her return. Her personal phone developed odd characteristics during calls, clicks and echoes that had not been present before. Letters began arriving at her residence that showed signs of having been opened and resealed, though nothing was ever obviously missing. Her car, which was maintained by trusted staff, suddenly failed to start one morning. The mechanic who examined it found that a brake line had been severed, damage he attributed to possible rodent activity, though the explanation seemed unlikely given the car's secure storage. Anne was not naive about these incidents. She contacted an old acquaintance who had retired from British intelligence services and asked him to conduct a security sweep of her home and electronic devices. What he found confirmed her suspicions. Tracking software had been installed on her phone, sophisticated enough that it would not have been noticed without specific searching. Small listening devices were discovered in her private study, placed in locations where they would pick up conversations but remain virtually invisible. Someone was watching her, listening to her, tracking her movements. The implications were clear. Whoever had been involved in what Diana was investigating knew that Anne had found the evidence, and they wanted to know what she intended to do with it. During this period of increasing unease, Anne received an unmarked package. Inside was nothing but a name written on a card: Timothy Radcliffe. Anne recognized the name from her research into Diana's final year. Radcliffe had been one of Diana's private secretaries, someone who had worked closely with her, and then quietly disappeared from public life after her death. Anne located him living in a modest home outside Bath. When she contacted him requesting a meeting, he agreed immediately, but insisted on choosing the location. They met late one evening in a small chapel, a place he said was known to very few people and where they could speak without concern about surveillance. Radcliffe appeared older than Anne expected, worn down by years of carrying knowledge he had not been able to share. He wasted no time with pleasantries. He told Anne directly that Diana had not been working alone in her final months. A small group of people, all of them outside the normal royal structure, had helped her investigate and document what she was uncovering. They had maintained silence after her death, partly out of fear and partly because they had no evidence that would be taken seriously without Diana's testimony. He described the official investigation into Diana's death as deliberately incomplete. Witness statements that contradicted the preferred narrative were ignored or dismissed. Physical evidence, including surveillance footage from the tunnel in Paris, had gone missing or been declared unavailable. The white Fiat that multiple witnesses reported seeing at the scene was never adequately traced, and inquiries into its origins were closed without satisfactory explanation. Radcliffe's account is aligned with information that has surfaced over the years from various independent investigations into Diana's death. Multiple researchers and journalists have pointed to inconsistencies in the official reports, gaps in the evidence chain, and witnesses whose testimonies were not fully explored. While official conclusions have maintained that the crash was an accident caused by excessive speed and driver impairment, questions have persisted about whether all relevant evidence was thoroughly examined. Anne returned home that night to find an envelope that had been slid under her door. There was no marking on the outside, but the message inside was brief and unmistakable: stop digging or join her. The threat was clear, direct, and personal. Someone wanted Anne to know that continuing Diana's investigation would put her own life at risk. She stood in her entryway holding that piece of paper, feeling the weight of everything she had learned. Diana had been right. The danger had been real. And now, by following the trail Diana had left, Anne had placed herself in the same position, watched, threatened, and isolated from the protection she might normally expect as a member of the royal family. Anne spent the following days working through Diana's evidence methodically, cross-referencing names, tracing financial connections, and building a comprehensive picture of what Diana had uncovered. The more she examined the materials, the clearer the scope became. This was not a simple case of isolated financial misconduct. Diana had been documenting what appeared to be an organized network that used royal connections and charitable foundations as cover for moving money across international borders. The financial records showed patterns that would have been difficult to detect without knowing what to look for. Donations would flow into legitimate charities with well-publicized humanitarian missions. But once inside these organizations, the money would be divided through a series of internal transfers, each one appearing routine when viewed individually. Portions would then be redirected to consulting firms, investment vehicles, or other entities that existed primarily on paper. From there, the trail became deliberately complicated, flowing through multiple jurisdictions before ultimately benefiting individuals who had no apparent connection to charitable work. Anne created timelines matching these financial movements with Diana's travel schedule and public appearances. What emerged was troubling. Diana's international humanitarian work, particularly her campaigns around landmine awareness and refugee support, had taken her to regions where significant financial and political interests were at stake. Her high-profile visits had provided perfect cover for other activities occurring simultaneously in those same locations. Activities involving arms sales, resource extraction deals, and financial transactions that required discretion. What struck Anne most forcefully was the element of betrayal, woven through the evidence. Diana had documented interactions with people she had initially trusted, individuals who had encouraged her charitable work while apparently using her public presence for their own purposes. Some of these people had been close to Diana, attending events together, corresponding regularly, presenting themselves as allies in her humanitarian efforts. Among the financial records were transactions that traced back to accounts connected with individuals inside the palace structure itself. Anne cross-referenced these against official records and found discrepancies that were difficult to explain through legitimate means. When she matched the names against Diana's notes and recordings, a picture emerged of people who had been in positions to know about Diana's investigation and who had apparent financial motivations to want it stopped. One name appeared repeatedly in Diana's documentation, someone whose public image had remained untarnished over the decades, someone who held a position of trust within the extended royal network. Anne verified the connections multiple times, reluctant to believe what the evidence suggested, but the pattern was unmistakable. She reached out again to Timothy Radcliffe and to one of Diana's former colleagues from her work with the Red Cross. After considerable hesitation, the Red Cross contact confirmed what Anne had begun to suspect. Diana had been preparing to release information publicly in collaboration with an investigative journalist. They had been working on a detailed report that would have named specific individuals and organizations, backed by documentation that Diana had been gathering. That report was never published. The journalist Diana had been working with was found dead in his apartment 3 weeks after Diana's death. The official cause was listed as an accidental drug overdose, though people who knew him insisted he had no history of drug use. His research materials were never recovered, and his buffets. Editors reported that his files on the story Diana had been helping with had disappeared. This information aligned with investigative reporting that has been conducted over the years into suspicious deaths connected to financial corruption cases. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, several journalists working on stories involving international financial misconduct died under circumstances that raised questions, though official investigations typically concluded these were accidents or suicides. As Anne delved deeper into the materials, she discovered a file Diana had labeled Operation Marionette. It contained correspondence between security operatives and a private security firm that had been contracted to provide protective services, though the exact nature of those services was described in deliberately vague language. The documents discussed monitoring protocols and risk assessment related to Diana's movements in the summer of 1997. One memo, dated just days before Diana's trip to Paris, contained language that Anne found deeply disturbing. It referenced the need for containment measures and noted that risk levels are elevated and require immediate attention. The phrasing was ambiguous enough to allow for multiple interpretations, but in the context of everything else Diana had documented, it took on a more sinister meaning. The final piece of evidence that shook Anne most profoundly was a surveillance photograph that had apparently never been made public. It showed the tunnel in Paris where Diana's car crashed, but it was taken from an angle that captured more than just the immediate crash site. In the background, partially obscured but visible, was the white Fiat that multiple witnesses had reported seeing at the scene. But behind that vehicle was another car, one that had never been mentioned in official reports. The license plate, though grainy, was clear enough that Anne was able to trace it. The registration led to a company that provided transportation, services for corporate clients. Further investigation revealed that this company had connections to one of the security firms mentioned in Diana's Operation Marionette files. The connection was not direct enough to prove coordination, but it established a link that had never been explored in the official investigation. Anne found herself facing an impossible situation. She held evidence suggesting that Diana's death might not have been the accident it was officially ruled to be. But the people potentially implicated were powerful, well-connected, and apparently willing to use intimidation to protect their interests. She had already received one direct threat, and the surveillance of her activities made it clear she was being closely monitored. The decision about what to do next was complicated by a phone call from Timothy Radcliffe, his voice tense with urgency. He informed Anne that there had been a security incident at Lambrook School where Prince George was a student. Anne, unauthorized individual, had attempted to gain access to the grounds using false credentials. The person had been stopped by security before reaching any students, but the timing of the attempt, coming just as Anne was deepening her investigation, seemed too coincidental to ignore. Radcliffe's assessment was stark. He believed the network Diana had been investigating was still active and still protective of its secrets. By pursuing Diana's evidence, Anne had drawn their attention, and now he feared they were sending a message by demonstrating they could reach Diana's grandchildren. Anne acted immediately, though she had to work outside normal channels. She contacted a former MI5 director who had once assisted Diana with a security matter, someone Diana had mentioned in her notes as trustworthy. Within hours, discreet protection details were arranged for both of Diana's sons and their families. The measures were unofficial, activated through personal connections rather than official royal security protocols, because Anne no longer knew who within those official channels could be trusted. She also made a decision that she knew would be irreversible. She arranged a meeting with two senior members of the royal family, individuals whose names had appeared in Diana's financial documentation. The meeting took place in a private room at Clarence House, away from staff and recording systems. Anne laid out what she had found, not with accusation, but with the steady presentation of evidence. She explained the financial trails, the connections Diana had documented, and the questions that remained unanswered about Diana's death. The two royals listened in silence, their expressions carefully controlled. When Anne finished, one of them attempted to dismiss her concerns, suggesting that Diana had been under enormous stress and that her interpretations of financial data may have been influenced by emotional instability. But Anne cut through the deflection. She placed copies of specific documents on the table, transactions that bore signatures and authorizations that would be difficult to explain away. She made her position clear. If anything happened to William, Harry, or their children, if any further attempts were made to intimidate or harm Diana's family, she would release everything publicly. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence Diana had preserved. The consequences would be devastating, not just for individuals, but for the institution itself. The response was cold but telling. One of the royals warned her that she was making enemies she could not see, that she was interfering in matters beyond her understanding. Anne's reply was simple. She said she already had made those enemies, and she was still standing. The situation escalated rapidly after that confrontation. Security teams monitoring Prince William's residence reported unusual activity. A delivery van with false registration had attempted to bypass perimeter security. When intercepted, it was found to contain surveillance equipment and, most alarmingly, automotive parts that appeared designed to cause brake failure in specific vehicle models used by the household. Then came the incident that nearly resulted in tragedy. A vehicle carrying Catherine and two of her children was forced off a narrow road in the countryside. The driver managed to maintain enough control to prevent serious injury, but the car was severely damaged. Accident investigators initially treated it as a case of dangerous driving by an unknown motorist who fled the scene. But when the vehicle's systems were examined more closely, evidence suggested the braking system had been compromised before the journey began. Anne recognized the pattern immediately. This was not random. This was the same kind of manufactured accident that Diana had feared in her final months, the same method she had written about in her letters. The attempt had failed this time, but the message was unmistakable. The people Diana had been investigating were still capable of reaching the royal family, and they were willing to do so to protect their secrets. Faced with this escalating danger, Anne made the decision Diana had never gotten the chance to make. She would go public with everything. She arranged a press conference through channels she trusted, bringing in security from outside the normal royal protection systems. The venue was selected for its security capabilities, and attendance was limited to established media organizations with verified credentials. Behind her were representatives from MI5 who had been quietly reviewing the evidence and who were prepared to announce that formal investigations were being opened. When Anne spoke, her words were measured but devastating. She explained that new evidence had come to light regarding Princess Diana's activities in the months before her death. She described Diana's investigation into financial corruption involving charitable organizations and her documentation of what she believed was systematic criminal activity. Anne made it clear that Diana had not been paranoid or unstable, but had been conducting a legitimate investigation based on concrete evidence. She did not make direct accusations about Diana's death. Instead, she stated that the evidence Diana had preserved raised questions that had never been adequately addressed in the original investigation. She called for a thorough, independent review of all available evidence with access to materials that had been sealed or withheld from previous inquiries. The impact was immediate and seismic. Within days, several high-profile individuals named in Diana's documentation resigned from their positions, citing personal reasons, but clearly responding to the pressure of public scrutiny. Law enforcement agencies in multiple countries announced investigations into financial irregularities at organizations Diana had been monitoring. Offshore accounts were frozen pending examination. Several arrests were made, though the cases would take years to work through the legal system. The story dominated news coverage internationally. Public opinion was divided between those who saw vindication of long-held suspicions about Diana's death and those who cautioned against jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information. But regardless of perspective, the evidence Anne had revealed demanded a response, and institutions that had previously closed inquiries found themselves forced to reopen them. In the quieter aftermath, Anne established the Diana Truth Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting investigative journalism, protecting whistleblowers, and promoting transparency in charitable organizations. The foundation's mission was simple: to continue the work Diana had started and to ensure that people who discovered wrongdoing had safe channels to expose it. Months later, while organizing materials from Diana's jewelry box for permanent preservation, Anne discovered something she had missed initially. There was another hidden mechanism in the box, even more carefully concealed than the first compartment. Inside was a single cassette tape in an envelope labeled for William and Harry, only if the world finally hears me. Anne listened to the recording alone. Diana's voice filled the room, speaking directly to her sons with a mother's love and wisdom. She told them she hoped they would never need to hear this message, that she hoped the truth would remain buried, and they could live their lives without the burden of knowing what she had discovered. But if they were hearing it, she wanted them to know she had acted not out of recklessness, but out of love for them and belief in their ability to make things better. She urged them not to carry fear, but to carry courage forward. She reminded them they were not just symbols or titles, but human beings with the power to choose what kind of world they would help create. Her final words were simple. She had tried to do what was right, and she hoped they would do the same, for themselves and for all those who never had a voice. Anne sat in silence after the recording ended, tears on her face. Diana's legacy was no longer just tragedy and loss. It was the truth, preserved and finally revealed. It was courage in the face of institutional pressure. It was a mother's determination to protect her children by giving them knowledge rather than leaving them in ignorance. The jewelry box sat empty now, its secrets released. But Diana's voice, once silenced, had finally been heard,